Hello everybody. I'm back with another video. This time I'll be showing you 5 different ways to shade on a digital platform. And to do that, I'll be using my OC Muriel. She's the vampire OC that I had in my process video. Anyways, let's start out with, I won't be showing too many basics or, the basics of shading, but I will touch on it. So here's our light source. I'm going to use this for all 5 of the different shadings. Okay, so for the first one, put a new layer over top of your color and put that layer on clipping, which is like an easy way to make sure you don't have color going outside of the lines. So if it weren't on clipping, it would look like that, but being on clipping, it doesn't go outside of the line. Okay, so this first one is a type of blocking. It's called vector, I believe, and it's the type of shading that you usually see in cartoons because it's really easy to do. So what you would do is just take the color and turn the HSV, like make it darker or make it more opaque, like that, in order to create the illusion of shading. And then you put the shading on the opposite side of where your light source is, because the sun creates shading on the opposite side. So for example, these knees here, because knees bulge out, they would create a shadow. Like that. Now the clipping thing isn't like totally perfect. You'll still have to go in and erase some parts, especially if you don't have your different colors and different layers. But I don't like having 5 million layers. It gets messy really quickly. You also, for this particular one, would have to take the color of every single article of clothing or her skin or whatever, just to get the correct color. That's pretty much it for vector shading. I'll shade more so you can see and put it in speed paint mode. And so, speed paint. Oh, one more thing I wanted to say about vector shading is that most of the time it's cool and easy to just like slide this up a little bit and then make that be shading. But it's a lot more interesting if you switch up the colors a little bit. Like, don't be afraid to take the color and then just go all the way into like the green section if you feel like green would work better. I mean, it's more interesting to go outside of the comfort zone than to just choose the darker color of the same color that you're shading. So for example, I went here and just turned up the color to a little bit more of a reddish color, since I think that will work better with this sort of grayed out brownish color that I have for her hair. You could also, if you want, go into like a pinky color. That would also work. And just turn up the HSV a little bit so that it's actually a shady color. Like, that would work if you like it. I don't like it all that much, but that is a lot more interesting than just going, okay, let's make this a little bit darker and then shade. I mean, it works, but not nearly as interesting. Okay, that's all I had to say. Back to the speed paint. Okay, so that took about 25 minutes for me to do. That's pretty quick for me. I don't know if it's considered quick as artists in general, though. Anyways, moving on to the next one. This next one is, put a new layer over top of your drawing. Make sure it's on clipping. Just reminding myself and yourself of that. And what we're going to do this time is select the color that you want to shade. And remember where our light source is coming from here. And on this layer, we're going to put, see where it says blending normal. I'm going to click on edit and go to multiply. This is basically the cheater's way to shading. Remember how with the vector shading, the blocking shading that I was doing before, I was telling you how you'll have to pick up each color and put it down. Like, get that color, put it down, get that color, put it down. With this one, you can literally just choose one color that you want to be unanimous throughout the shading and say that's good enough. This is what I used to do with my shading because it's easy and quick. But now I tend to like a little bit more different colors, a little bit more variety in my colors. But this is super easy to do. And it's, in my opinion, actually more useful than just the vector shading from before because you get a lot more, what do you call it? I guess it looks a little bit more interesting, like the darks are darker and everything. You see the difference between them? Of course, you can change up the color in different areas if you want to. And I don't know how that would look because I've never actually done it, but I'm pretty sure it will actually be more interesting, even more interesting than it already is. Like if I wanted to actually take this bluish color for her pants and add that into there, it'd be pretty interesting. Or let's say I want to do some color theory stuff and take, because the opposite of blue is orange, take orange and use that. That could work too. Or if you want to put blue in her orangish hair, for example, you could do that too. But I'm just going to stick with the little reddish color that I had. Put it back on multiply, and there we go. So enough of the dead space, let's turn this into a speed paint. Another technique that you could do, that I see a lot of people actually do, is take the color in any sort of vector, whether it's multiply or blocking, and just have a darker color on the outside, and then just get lighter in little waves like this. This is a really old technique I used to do when I was a tiny little artist baby. I think it's really useful if you like a sort of pixely type shading. So that one took me about 20 minutes, a little bit less. But anyways, let's move on to the next one. Here's a side-by-side shot of those two to see which one you like better. I personally like the vector one better than the multiply one. But let's see something. Yeah, turned down the opacity is pretty much the same. Okay, so let's go to the next one. I'm gonna go down here. I feel like there was something that I was supposed to tell you, but I can't remember. So I might come out with some random fact at some point. Anyways, let's put a new layer on top of it, put it on clipping. And this one is all about just messing with opacity. So for example, you can go in here and just like vector shading, use your HSV to make it darker and then just go in. But what I'm going to do here is going to turn the opacity down on the brush itself to 50%. That should work just about. And then color over it. I just messed up it on the wrong layer. Oops. No big deal. There we go. Okay, put that on clipping. And we're good. Okay. So you can do that. The only thing about just using like the opacity thing is if you want to go back and fill out something, you'll end up with something like this. Well, you'll see that there's something more opaque on this side than on that side, which can actually be used to your advantage. Like I explained before with the layering of like a lighter color on top of a darker color, you can totally use that as with just the opacity, and that works just the same, honestly. You can also just block shade like I did in vector and just see at 100%, put it in, and then just turn the opacity down on the whole layer. This will get rid of the whole brush opacity layering problem before, where you had the more opaque parts next to the not opaque parts. So if you want smooth color, you turn down the opacity on the layer. If you actually like the idea of the layered opacity thing, you can use a lower opacity on your brush. If you don't have a program that does this, by the way, you definitely should look into a different program. I'm using Medibang, if you didn't know that already. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this one. So I'll just go in and I'll do the opacity brush on one side and the opacity layer on the other side, so you can see the difference between the two. Okay, speed paint. Forgot that quick that I said I would do two things on a different side. Oh man. The only thing about doing the opacity layer thing is it can get pretty annoying if you like have to constantly turn the opacity back up just to get the right color again. Okay, so I did the opacity layer on her, what do you call this? Artist brain, right side. So I'm going to go and do the opacity brush on the other side. So I'm going to put a new layer, put it on clipping, and make sure the opacity is at 100% and just do the brush at 50%. Okay, let's go. See, when you use the opacity down brush like this, you have kind of that drawing with the pen effect to the point that you can't really erase anything, or you would have to undo something completely if you want to go back in. because otherwise you might go in and try to fix something by adding more color, but instead you'll end up just kind of making it look more messy. But it's fine if you like the way that looks. You know, this is oh, I remember what I wanted to say now. This, because at the beginning I said I will be showing you like basics. I won't be showing you so much basics, and this is just for people who want to find a style of shading that they like the best to help build their style, because shading is one of the biggest parts of a style that, you know, defines their style. So hopefully you'll take a look at this and go, okay, yeah, like I really like the way that the multiply looks, or I really like the way that the opacity brush looks, so maybe I'll do that and incorporate it into my own style. And so yeah, hopefully that works out for you. Another great thing about lowering the opacity on the layer is that if, for example, you think something's too dark, you can just make it lighter. If you think it's too light, you make it darker. You know, you can just find a middle until you like what you see. Like if, for example, I was at 50% and I think 50% might be a little bit too light, so I would go just a smidge darker, to say around 65%, and I like the way that looks because it's a lot more in your face, you know. You really do have to be a lot more careful when you're using the opacity brush. Okay, so that last one took about 20 minutes as well. And so we're going to move on to the fourth one. New layer, clipping. Alright, so for this one in particular, we're going to show you textures. This is purely stylistic, and it can actually make your shading a lot more interesting looking than even just changing the color up a bit. So for example, let's take fluffy watercolor here, and we're gonna change the HSV and then do that. See that little bit of texture there can make it seem like way more interesting. So I'm just gonna block it out just like I do with a vector. Nothing too different. And if you need to erase, you should probably use the soft eraser. Like that. And for this, you don't need to use a particular brush. You can also just make your own texture. Like for example, you can go in and with like a normal pen, and then just go in and do something like hatching. I do this all the time now. You can hatch, or you can cross hatch. You can even stipple if you want. In fact, I think I have a stipple brush, don't I? Nope, I don't. Must be on a different one. No, here it is. I'm just blinding this all. Yeah, so you can even use that. And it creates this cool texture that makes the shading make it even more kind of lifelike. If that's your type of thing, I mean. But I'm gonna stick, just so this can be like one unanimous color, I'm gonna stick with fluffy watercolor. And usually the bigger your brush size is, the more intense the texture is. So sometimes you'll have to raise the size of your brush quite a lot in order to get the right texture. Just adjust as you find necessary. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, my opacity with all my texture brushes are usually way lower, as to avoid like way too dark shading. have to use a certain type of brush. You can just go in with hatching or stippling. Or one of the things that I've been doing a lot more lately is using a watercolor brush and then like fading out the color. So let's go in here, choose a color that I want to shade, and just lock in the color, turn up the opacity. And then what I'll do after that is I'll take the same color of the, in this case the hair, and just fade out the edges like this. I'm actually gonna lower the opacity a bit. Make it blend in a little bit softer. And like that. That's another way you can get texture. So I'm gonna do watercolor just for the hair so you can see the blending process. Another great thing about using blending textured brushes is that you can always use just like a ton of different colors. As you might have saw, I was going back and forth between like a more browner color to more pinker color and more purple, and it's creating like all this depth just by using different colors like that. Okay, so now that I have all of my color laid down, I'm just gonna take the original color of the hair and just feather out the edges, blend it out well. And there you go. Now you have like a softly blended type of textured shading. Another thing about this type of shading here is oftentimes you'll have moments where you're like accidentally go across the line a little bit, and I think if it's just like a little like that, you shouldn't worry about it, because in real life colors reflect off of each other anyways, so it's not that big of a deal. I mean, it'd be nice if you have it nice and clean, but you don't have to make a big deal out of it being so super clean that it doesn't even reflect any color off of each other. Okay. That last one took me a little bit over 20 minutes to do. It's the one that I do the most usually, but I guess with all of the talking and stuff, it took a little bit longer than usual. Okay, so for the fifth and final shading technique, I'm gonna be showing you the more comic booky type way that people usually shade, which is by taking a pin, putting the layer over top of the layer, put it on clipping, taking black, just stark black, and then going in and like shading with the black. This can be quite intense, and it's a little bit too much to like do a full body sort of thing like we would do with vector shading, like here. So usually what people do is they only put the black in specific spots, like in really closed off spots. They will block out some black right here, or they will block out some black at the neck, and I've already done that in the line art. But another thing that people also do is they'll take just like a line of black and then they'll fade it out by going in with smaller lines, creating a sort of hatching. This can create both shading and detail. Like if you have a rough texture, you might, let's say the socks are kind of rough, you would go in with that texture. I usually have the size really small for this type of thing. And you go in and you hatch to create like both shading and texture for the socks. This is great for people who like a lot of detail in their work. What I do to get a sort of sense of it fading out is I'll go in, so like the lines will be really close together, closer to the thing that's creating the shadow, and I'll hatch and cross hatch, and then I'll just put a line outside of it further away and make the line smaller and smaller and less opaque as well, to get that sort of sense of fading. Okay, so I actually think that with this type of shading, it goes good with other shading, but should be sparsely used. Unless it's just black and white or pencil drawings or something along those lines. So what I'll do here is I'll go into the hair and show you how I usually color my hair by using both hatching shading and using watercolor shading. So this is kind of a sixth way to shade. In a way, it's you can just mix a whole bunch of different things that you like. You don't have to just do vector or just do texture or just do opacity. You can do all of them at once if you like a mixture of them. So here I'll show you what I do with the hair so you can get a sense of what I mean by that. I usually go in and I'll take some black with a regular pen and just go in and hatch in little lines here and there in places that would be kind of like shady. I vary the line size to make it more interesting. Okay, so after I'm done with that, I'll go in with my watercolor brush and just block in the color on a new layer. And I basically just do the exact same thing that I did in the fourth shading one where I showed you in the hair. Okay, and then I just make sure that the line layer is above the shading layer, otherwise you wouldn't really see the black lines. And so there you get all the texture of the hatching, and you get the texture in the watercolor hair, and that's usually how I go with everything. And sometimes I'll go and I'll put the opacity lower depending on how I feel. Sometimes I even add multiply if I feel like it needs more to it. Yeah, the point of that was just so that you can do any sort of combination of any of those that you want, whether you like both the texture shading along with vector shading along with opacity shading along with hatching shading. You can do all of them if you feel like it, but just try out everything. With the hatching, also make sure you vary up the size of the brush because it can make it more interesting that way as well. Okay, so I nearly forgot to record the entire hatching process. So I just went in and hatched the whole thing so you can see what a full hatched drawing looks like. But remember at the beginning when I said this is usually the thing that you see in manga or comics. Even though you can absolutely do this in color if you like it, I think it looks way better if it's just like black and white. Like this. See? There we go. See, I think that looks like really, really cool if you're doing a black and white type manga thing. But with color, it's fine, but not really my cup of tea. And just as a little bonus, I'm going to show you. Remember when I said putting a layer over and putting on multiply is kind of like a cheater's way to shade? Well, here's an even more cheater's way to shade. Just take your original color layer, duplicate it, put that whole thing on multiply, and then just go in and erase. See? It's absolutely amazing if you're into this type of thing. Especially if you want to get really intense shading. So instead of trying to shade the whole thing yourself, you just erase the things that you don't want to be there. Makes sense, right? So if you want like intense shading, it's only around the edges and stuff like that, this would totally work. I want to try to rush through this because this video is long enough. And there you have it. You might need to go back in and fix stuff up if you're actually using this, because in order to get through something, like let's say you erase a part but you don't like it the way it looks, you would have to undo or go in and change this layer back to normal, select the color, and then redraw over it. So it was a little bit tedious. Okay, and that's it. If you want, tell me in the comments which one you like the best. I'll zoom out so you can see all of them. And I'll also change over to hatching. Okay, tell me which one you like the best. I personally like the vector, the watercolor, and the opacity brush ones. They're really cool. And of course, for manga, that's just amazing to do on its own. Alright then, thank you for watching. See you later.